Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Sunday classes sponsored by the BYU Family History Library, located in Provo, Utah. I'm Rayanne Mielik, and I will be your host today. Our class today will be Help for the Absolute Genealogy Beginner, presented by James Tanner. James has extensive experience in both teaching and helping patrons with their genealogy and family history, but somewhere along the way, he had to have been an absolute beginner. James, the time is now yours, and I want to just remind everyone that these classes are intended for general audience. And so please keep your questions with that in mind. James?
Okay, well, we're ready to go then. We'll go. Welcome everybody to Help for the Absolute Genealogy Beginner. Obviously, I could have used a lot of different words than like novice or something else, but sounds pretty good. And we're going to start with a very basic thing here, and that is genealogy is spelled with an A. Just in case you hadn't noticed, it's not Genealogy like everything else out there, like psychology and stuff like that. It's genealogy, Johnny, with an A. And that's kind of a reason I mention that is because way back in the early days, when the internet was just barely getting started, there was a paper publication called The Computer Genealogist. And we got it in the store because I was running an Apple dealership at the time. And I decided I need to write an article for it about computers because that's what I was doing. And I wrote the article and sent it in, and they sent it back and said, "We like your article, we'll probably publish it, but you need to learn how to spell genealogy." So that was my first introduction. So I figured it'd be a good introduction here, that it is actually spelled with an A. And that confuses. But my email address uses the word genealogy. And every time I give it to someone, I have to spell it for them. And I would guess that people get it wrong about more than half the time. So that's just a good start there when you're thinking about doing some genealogy here. And genealogy is the study of family history and how people are related to each other. It's kind of a broad subject. It has been around for probably 3,000 or 4,000 years, I would imagine. Some of the earliest writings in history are genealogies or have genealogies in them. And it became, during the 1800s, it was a big deal, mainly because people were interested here in the United States in determining whether they had royal ancestry or had some ability to receive an inheritance. And there were a lot of people who were out making a few bucks on the side, producing false genealogies and getting money from people so that they felt really good about their history. That's a very short summary of what was going on in a very long history of difficulty with people doing genealogies which were not correct. And here's the other downside of that, obviously, is that we've inherited a lot of that. And so you're likely, and if you keep looking long enough, you may actually find one of those lines that's been incorporated into some part of someone's genealogy about your family. So you need to be very careful when you are doing your genealogy to establish some actual historical records that substantiate the information that you're trying to acquire about your family. But in addition to that, genealogists used historical records. Now, every one of these is a very important point. Genealogy should be and is necessary that it be established by the use of historical records. That means we need to go back in and look at the records. Also, oral interviews, that's perfectly valid, and genetic analysis to trace a family's lineage. Of course, genetic analysis is what we call DNA, and that is right now, because of the extreme use of DNA. In other words, it's gone from practically unknown into being a major part of genealogical research. is that it helps to substantiate the paper genealogy that you've done. If you've managed to trace your lineage back 5 or 6 generations, a genealogy, a DNA test from Ancestry or MyHeritage will help you feel comfortable that these people that you've been finding are actually related to you. So this is it's a great these are great advances in what we have now today in genealogy. But when you get right down to it, your genealogy is really the story of your family. So you have your family. This is a photo of part of my family. The person sitting over there on the left with the long beard is my great-great-great-grandfather. And these are all his children. And if you look down at one of the really little tiny baby kids there, one of those is my father. And my grandmother is sort of in the middle of the group of people. She's wearing a white dress and she's looking straight ahead. She's standing next to a guy with a mustache and a tie. So those are some of my direct ancestors. And these people are Oversons. That's my name. And they came from Denmark. And the person sitting over there is actually the immigrant from Denmark. So I guess this is an invitation. This particular video presentation is inviting you to come along and learn the stories. Learn your story, learn all the stories. And sometimes the stories are sad, sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're extremely difficult to find and discover, and sometimes they just seem to pop out, and you have a tremendous way of learning to how these people lived and where they lived and what was very difficult in their lives. So the first step, obviously, is to begin by talking to your relatives and asking questions. All of us who have lived many, many years and started genealogy somewhat later in life than when we were children, perhaps are wishing that we'd spent more time with those that were old and that we knew. I had the privilege of knowing my great-grandmother quite well. She visited our home frequently, and we had quite a large amount of time with her. In fact, my father had lived with her. He was a virtual orphan. His mother had died, and his father was did construction, and so he lived with his grandmother. So we knew her well, and she lived to be quite old, and so I could have spent quite some time learning and hearing her stories and her history, which she wrote in a very large book of 600 or 700 pages. So it wasn't a loss in a sense of we didn't get any information, but on the other hand, it would have been nice to hear some of the individual stories from her. Now, the question you may say is, well, what if I don't have any relatives? Well, you actually do, whether you are aware of it or not. You have 2 parents, a male and a female parent, and you have 4 grandparents and 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. We go on. It just goes back on a straight power of 2 back exponentially. So that's your direct line grandparents. That's not your aunts and uncles and cousins and all of the other people out there. And so even if you don't know these people, even if you have no idea that they exist, they're there and they're out there and they're they're available to be found. And one way to do that, of course, is to begin with having a family tree on one of the major websites, and also to get a DNA test along with your family tree. The 2 have to go together. You have to have a family tree and you have to have the DNA test. And it's kind of we're talking about something that it says that we assume that you know who your relatives are. And on the other hand, So if you don't know who they are, then you were to have to go to find them out. Well, that's what comes first. It's kind of a chicken and an egg problem. So you're looking at a situation where you have to start somewhere, and you can start by looking at whatever you have in your own possession, and then you move to the things that you don't know. And obviously, we have the situation where you start with yourself, and then you look what you don't know, which is everything else. In other words, anything you don't know is what's out there. And there's what genealogy does is and what learning about it and how to do it is it will give you the tools necessary to go out and find this information and actually discover who your family is and where all of this information can come from. So here's the key to the whole thing. The key is that you need to learn something about doing genealogy before you go too far. So you need to learn about what is known about the way that we go about doing genealogical research, and that there is I'm not going to call it standard way, because there's no real it's kind of an individual thing, but there's a methodology, meaning there's a way of doing things in genealogy that produces accuracy and records and things that you need to learn about your family. So it's kind of very important that you begin with the process of learning. And learning is now overwhelming in the sense that there's so much information out there and so many ways to learn that it's a lot easier than it was 30 or 40 years ago. That's for sure, because back 40 years ago when I started, I didn't even know, didn't even know there were computer conferences. There was obviously no internet, so there was no online video sources. There are none of these things that we have today. But today there's a whole massive world of genealogical information out there that'll help you learn. And I'm going to focus on that here as I go along. Another thing that you need to be concerned about is organizing and structuring your family story. In other words, the information that you gather about your family may be very interesting, but it's got to be put into a structure. And right now we have, and there are a variety of programs out there, but we have online and individually purchasable programs that will give you the structure. They will provide the framework for recording the information and putting it into a way that it can be understood and organized so that it's possible for other people to look at it and say, oh yeah, I can see how we're related, or this kind of thing happens. Okay. So the question I guess I ask is, if you were going to drive, would you drive on a freeway before you learned how to drive? I mean, the first thing you do, you jump in your car and get on the freeway and go 80 miles an hour. You're probably going to end up like this. And unfortunately, that's kind of what happens out there in the world, that if people don't know what they're doing, the results aren't that great. And the second question would you be able to bake a cake without a recipe? So, these are the kinds of things that you would think, well, obviously not. Obviously, you need to have a recipe, or obviously you should learn how to drive. But unfortunately, it's not obvious that you need to learn something about genealogy before you jump in and start adding names to a family tree. So that's the question that comes up. Would you think you could do genealogical research without learning how to do it? And when you do, you end up with things like this and this is an actual copy of a record from the Family Search family tree, by the way. If you know anything about genealogy and done any of the work on the Family Search family tree, you'll realize that the first 3 names there are duplicates, and that there are 3 more duplicates below that. In fact, there are 4 duplicates below that. So out of those 51 children, there probably aren't 51 individuals if we get through doing all of the the merging that's probably available on this particular example. So how about getting some instructions? Okay, so now we're going to talk about, there's in just the last few weeks, there's been a kind of what you might call an adjustment in how all of the instruction is presented. And the Family Search website has been updated, and there are some things that are now very helpful through that website. The first one to get in and to understand is a major website that my wife and I have been working with the people who do this website now for a number of years. And it's called the Family History Guide. And what the Family History Guide is a free learning, research, and activities center for family history. It's a structured, sequenced teaching program. It has individually step-by-step instructions on how to do all of the major things in genealogy. The address is the thefhguide.com, thefhguide.com. It's a pretty simple address, and it's completely free and accessible, and it's a basic place to start learning. Now, what if you're an advanced genealogist or you've had a lot of experience in genealogy? Well, number one, it's structured so that if you wanted to, you could use the whole website as a teaching, as a outline for classes. It's already gives you all the information you need to teach a class or to be proficient in areas that you're not. I am willing to challenge almost everyone out there, including most genealogists who think that they're quite advanced, in that if they'll work through parts of the FH Guide, they'll find that that they do learn things. There are things in here that you probably do not know because of the vast amount of detail in this website. So here's an example. So you can see across the top where it says Family Search, Ancestry, My Heritage, Find My Past. Each of those areas have individual instructions for those programs and some other programs that go along with those programs. For example, with Family Search, there's detailed instructions for Goldie May, which is an add-on program which is now available on the Family Search Center's portal for all of the Family Search Centers around the world. But so Family Search Family Tree is one of the subjects. There's also one subject here that's extremely expansive, and that's countries. And there are structured instructions for starting research in almost every country of the world that has records that are searchable and available. So there's a detail here that is quite amazing. The second part of it is we have you'll need a place to record the information you find. And the Family Search Family Tree is a free website that will allow you to add in and put in that information. There's a lot of discussion out there about the Family Search Family Tree, but for most people who are starting to enter their information in the family tree, unless you, by probable possibility that as you enter information about some of your deceased ancestors, you may very well connect with deceased ancestors already in the tree, in which case your whole process of finding out who your ancestors were just becomes overwhelmingly large instead of just a few names that you're aware of. But in any case, it's still acknowledged to be one of the best places, and certainly one of the very few free places that have the ability to help you, as well as provide a structure for entering your family history. Now, what's new about the family history, about Family Search and this, is that you can access a complete structured set of lessons that teach you step-by-step research process and about the Family Search Family Tree and about everything else a lot of the things, not everything, but a significant amount of the other things that you need to know to get going in genealogy. So this is the website, familysearch.org. And I would suggest you start by getting in, and you can register, you can sign in and see a lot of things. You can see a lot of the things without signing in, but you went in order to actually access most of the content of the website, you'll need to sign in and register with a free registration, and you won't be harassed or sent emails or anything. If you want to, there's a place when you register to click little boxes that says send me information, in which case you'll get a bunch of emails, but that's optional. You may not be aware, and this is something that's relatively new, it's only been the last few weeks, that this has been structured the way it has been and available online, that there is a Family Search Learning Center, and it's a good place to start. Here's a little animated sign-in process. First of all, you click on the little icon, the question mark, and then on Help and Learning. And it goes to this section, and you scroll down, and there's the Learning Center. It says Build Skills, Make Progress. And here's what's in the Learning Center. There's a research process introduction, there's US Census research, and other ways to search that are helpful. And it's very, very helpful to go through these getting started classes. But down below, the four options down below, 3 of which are already online and 1 of which is coming soon, the Homeland Research. But Research Basics will take you through a number of very specific classes teaching you the entire research process. And these Research Basics lessons are used by the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City and by the BYU Family History Library and around in other places where church service missionaries of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are used as volunteers. And so this is the basic training for all of those people, as well as available now free online. And you don't even have to be registered to get into this. But when you click enough, you'll find out that you'll need to be registered, because there's some parts of the training and some parts of what's here that you'll need to register for. Now, there's Family Tree Basics, and this is a step-by-step. And the interesting thing about the Family Tree Basics is that it is based on the Family History Guide. And so though the Family History Guide is now an integral part of the training process for the familysearch.org website. It always has been for years now, but this is the first time it's actually been available directly from the Family Search website. So these are kind of interesting things. Now, over on the side, there's technology skills, and that is a list of instructions on how to use some of the equipment that's available for digitizing various things in both the Family Search Library and at the BYU Library. And so if you come to either of those libraries, you'll find quite an array of equipment for digitizing, of course, paper and books and VHS tapes and audio tapes, all sorts of different things, all the other slides, negatives, anything you're thinking of that you need to digitize, 8mm film. Those are all things that are available either at or at both of the BYU library or the one in Salt Lake City. And that's pretty much, there's a lot more obviously in here. It just is extensive, and there's the Family Tree Basics is a very long list of programs that are available, of classes, of lessons, what I would guess individual lessons that are available. So what I wanted to kind of point out here next is that there are at least five, and I've put it into five basic concepts of genealogical research, that how that research is supposed to be conducted. So first of all, genealogy is source supported based on contemporary historical records. So the concept here is that when we're looking for information about an individual, in this case, this is a parish register, and which means in the Catholic Church that this was a record of a baby who was baptized into the Catholic Church, not always a baby, because some people were baptized later in their lives. But this is a record of those baptisms, and it's an invaluable record for establishing not just the date of the baptism of a baby, but also the names of the parents, and in some cases, the names of the grandparents. And so this is a valuable historical record. But looking at this record that's on the screen right now, it would obviously be to some that there's some issues here. First of all, it's written in a language other than English. It's also written in handwriting, which may or may not be familiar to you. And so there you can see that there is here a challenge of things that need to be learned in order to do that kind of research. In order to be able to extract the information that's in this record, you need to be able to read it and, first of all, find it and know where it is and how to locate it. But you also need to be able to read this record and take out and use the information that's made available here. The next part of this is that you need to know that finding those historical records, any historical record that has to do with genealogy, is based on knowing the location of an event in your ancestors' lives. So it's the only connection. Well, first of all, that a record, a valuable genealogical historical record, is created at or near the time of an event that occurred in your ancestor's life by someone who actually observed the event or had the duty to report the event. So that's the technical discussion of the definition of what we're doing here. And the important thing here is location, and that is emphasized by location and more location. So knowing where this person came from, where an event occurred, is down to the house level, down to the farm level, down to the smallest level that it was recorded in that particular country or that particular place in the world, is how you differentiate people from all the other people out there who have the same name and who marry people with the same name and who have children with the same names. And so as you're working through your beginning your genealogy, the first part you would do is to identify your parents. Now, one thing that's happening quite frequently, enough to be frequently even reported in the news, online news, is that people are taking DNA tests and finding out that the family that they grew up in and were raised by are not their biological parents, or one of the two of their parents is not their biological parent. Well, it may seem to be something at least remarkable that this is happening, but the answer is that it's always been the case. And that is one reason why DNA testing has become such an important integral part of genealogical research, is because it makes it possible to discover these relationships that were maybe not completely undiscoverable before, but were very, very difficult to discover. And so basically, this is the process we go through. We identify a place through the process of research. If it says that your parents were born in Massachusetts, for example, then you begin by looking for records in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts doesn't help much. You need to know the county, and you need to know the city or the town where the person was born, or where the person died, or where they got married, or wherever whatever happened in this location will then will increase your chances of finding a record that pertains to your specific family. You're also necessary to keep good records about where you find the information about your family. This is called citing your sources. It means tell us where you found this information. Putting down a date on a family tree that says that your ancestor was born on January 15th of 1899 or something like that doesn't help us if we don't have a document, a record, a historical record that indicates that was the date that person was born. So we're not, it's a matter of being able to substantiate the information. Now, why do we do this? Well, if you recall a few minutes ago, I was talking about fraudulent activities that were occurring during primarily the late part of the 1800s. And that was happening because people were accepting genealogical pedigrees that had no records attached. And if they did have records attached, the records were made up. Now we're kind of coming full circle because, interestingly enough, artificial intelligence doesn't do genealogical research very well. And what some of us are finding when we ask some of these online artificial intelligence chat programs, and we ask them questions about an individual and ask for their genealogy, we get a lot of made up sources. So what goes around comes around. But in this case, we still have the burden of finding and validating the information from records that are readily available now as compared to just a few years ago. And another point that I made earlier is that the programs that we have, like FamilySearch.org and the Family Tree, give us the structure to record that information in this chronological fashion that makes it usable and makes it easy for other people to follow and understand where the information came from. And if we needed to, we could click on any one of those links on one of those sources there and get the complete information that told exactly where the record was located if I wanted, or someone else wanted to go look at that record completely. Okay, so here's the next kind of principle of the way that the genealogy works is to research back in time systematically without jumping over generations. It may seem, well, you might say, a little bit attractive to look at a fan chart or look at a pedigree and go back and then find a place where it stops and says, oh, I'm going to find the next person in that line. Well, that blank space on that pedigree on the Family Search Family Tree or other websites that have family trees may actually have been there for 100 years or more. In other words, people for that length of time have been trying to find that next individual and could not find them. And so a bit tense. If you're starting by adding in your parents, finding your grandparents may be your next obvious step. But you should not jump over generations just because it's difficult to find information about your grandparents and, oh, I'm related to this person, and so I can jump back to my great-grandparents. Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that does not, you're making an assumption that there's what's called a parent-child relationship between each step on the pedigree. And if that parent-child relationship has not been established by a historical record, then it in fact does not exist. And so basically jumping over generations has the danger that you may be launching off onto a family line that is not even your people. And constantly learning more about where and how to look for more information. Now, this is the basic activity of genealogists, and it's like it's like you want to get into the game. You want to already be a player. You want to get in and do what you want to do. It reminds me of watching my grandchildren and play a new game. You give them a new game. So what do? They spend the first half hour, 45 minutes, sometimes even longer, learning how the game is played. What are the rules of the game? Well, that's what we're doing here with genealogy. We're learning the rules of the game. We're saying, okay, this is how over many years of experience by all these different people, we actually do the work so that it makes sense and so that it can be validated by someone who just comes on it and has not seen all the work that's been put into it. So this is the answer. Well, for instance, here we have an image of a book that doesn't seem to have any information, but it has letters flying off of it. In a sense, this is kind of an analogy for some of the books out there. A lot of people around the United States and other parts of the world will find that genealogies of someone in their family may have already been published, and that it's all there in a book. And the easiest way to tell whether that book is going to be helpful or whether you're going to be able to use the information to actually substantiate your pedigree and your connections back to these people would be if it has citations to sources that you can actually go look at and verify that the information is correct. If it says that your great-grandmother was born in Nova Scotia in March of 1839, then you need to have a record that something that says that there's this record on file with some government entity in Canada, the archives of Nova Scotia, wherever, that's where your grandmother was born, and that's who she was. And that's the key to working your way through genealogy. Now, I don't know if you're going to hear any background here, but we have a thunderstorm sort of moving in, and there's a little bit of thunder in the background. My suggestion to almost anyone starting out is to get familiar with here in the United States, obviously, is to get familiar with the 1950 U.S. Census. Now, if you live in Great Britain, it could be the 1921 census, which is the latest and newest census that's available there. And other countries, there may be other basic records that you need to start with. And that's another part of learning about genealogy, is where you start looking in all these different countries. But here, in the 1950 census, some of us who were born back before 1950 obviously are in the 1950 census. And yes, I'm in the 1950 census. So are my parents, and so are my grandparents, except the ones who died before 1950. And both of my paternal grandparents died before 1950 and are not in the 1950 census. And my grandmother, my father's mother, died before the 1940 census and was the first census. The last census that she was in, well, not the first, but the last census she was in was in 1930. So there are, but there's a process here. And by becoming familiar with the census, you realize that the United States had censuses every 10 years, going back to 1790. And back to 1850 is when they began to record entire families. So it is possible to research every person in every family in all the census record going back to 1850. And to some people start telling me that it's impossible to find somebody in a specific census, and that may be the case, but it's usually because the name was misspelled or it's been misindexed. But if the person was alive, there was a very, very good chance that they ended up in one of those online censuses. And these censuses are available on the FamilySearch.org website for free, and they are also available on many other websites. So the challenge here is to find every family member of every family in every census that pertains to that family from 1850 to 1950. If you do that process, if you go through that process, even if you've been doing research for a long time, if you look down the list of sources that you have, or especially on familysearch.org, and you see that there isn't an 1850, an 1860, 1870, 1880, the 1890 census was destroyed. It's very likely that you will not find anybody in the 1890 census. And then the 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, and 1940, and 1950 censuses. So all those census records are available to search for each of the people in your family lines, at least back to 1850. Oh, there's a thunder that probably comes across. So next is when you have a family tree on Family Search or on Ancestry or Find My Past or My Heritage or one of the other big online family search, family history programs, you'll find that they have what are called record hints and or record matches or green leaves or whatever they are on the different programs. And these are extremely helpful and extremely valuable, but they need to be reviewed. That means you need to look at them and then you have to evaluate it. You have to say, now, is this really my person? And the first thing you look at is the place. Now, there could be somebody named Elizabeth Brooke who was born someplace besides St. George in the East in Middlesex and down in London. And so, or christened in St. George in the East in Middlesex. So, yeah, and it's very possible that there are 2 or 3 people named Elizabeth Brooke living downtown at that same time. So then you need to look and do some evaluation and maybe even find additional records before you make a determination that this particular information is correct. Learning that is the process of learning how to do that is part of the major process of learning how to do genealogy and making it so that it is actually correct. So here's what it tells you. There's a research help from Family Search. It's the blue icon, and it tells you that there's an England deaths and burials record for Elizabeth Ann Rossman. And if you look back there, you'll see her name was Elizabeth Ann Brooke. So you would need to know that her name or married name was Rossman, and that would be another factor in determining whether this record would be helpful. Now, if you just knew that it was Elizabeth Ann Brooke, and here's a Elizabeth Ann Rossman that comes up, Elizabeth Ann is an extremely common name in England, and because of the Queen's being named Elizabeth. And so just because you have someone that comes up with a record on Family Search does not mean that it is your person. So this is the next step, and that is to review and evaluate. And so here's more information, and this is the form that lets you enter that information into the Family Search family tree and attach that particular source to that person. So we can go down there and see that her husband's name was Edward Rossman, which we'd already discovered through a marriage record. And so this is her, probably, very likely her. And the information seems to be the same. And so we add that as another source, and that adds one little increment more of information to what we know about that person. And this is kind of a general suggestion. Before you even, as you get going, get to know who your grandparents are. If you want this example to find out how this works, and you have younger siblings, or you have children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren or whatever, you might want to ask some of them some of the questions that you might have. So, for example, if you have a grandchild and you say, what are your parents' names to the child? And I'm not talking about little baby kids. I'm talking about, like, say, teenagers or something. And you say, well, what are your parents' names? And it is not going to be unusual, by the way, that they will not know all of the information about what their parents' names are. They just won't know that. And if you ask people who their grandparents' names are and what their full names of their grandparents are, they will probably not know that at all. So those are the kinds of things that are not general knowledge among people today in our society. And some societies of the world, if you ask that question, they probably could recite their ancestors back generations. But in our kind of disjointed society, that is not very common. It is very uncommon that young people will know who their full names of their parents and the full names of their grandparents. And as far as going back to great-grandparents, probably not even known. Now, what about in a family like my family that is saturated in genealogy in some senses? Do they know the names? Some of them do, some of them don't. And some of them are interested, and even if they knew or heard who they were, or we have talked to them about it or shown that, they simply do not, that's not something that people generally remember in our society. Now, here's a suggestion. This particular presentation class will be put up on this BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, youtube.com. And BYU Family History Library is the channel. If you're at all familiar with YouTube, you'll know that everybody in the world has a channel up there and puts up videos. So you have some standard here. We have close to now about 850 videos. This screen capture was a couple of weeks ago. And since then, we've put up another number of videos. So we're pretty close to 850 videos or more. And many of them have quite a few views. This is not like some of the websites where you get a million views in an hour on YouTube, but it is a respectable number of views for a source like this. And the information is being added constantly. So this is something that's a great resource for getting an understanding and learning about Jewish genealogy. Now, if you want more videos than that, you go to the rootstech.org website. That's rootstech.org, just all one word, rootstech. And if you click on view all of the videos on the website, you'll see that there are 4,325 videos. These are for the last few years of all of the videos that have been submitted to RootsTech, and they're in there by subject. And so there's just is lots and lots and lots of information that is available here online and free. Now, as you're going back, as I indicated with that record that I showed earlier, one of the things you may want to learn at some point is how to read old handwriting. Now, this is going to be a challenge for a lot of younger people, because we find that our grandchildren, even those who are well advanced into high school and graduating from high school, cannot read handwriting, cannot read script at all. So handwriting is just like a foreign language to them. And so as time goes on, there are going to be fewer and fewer people who can read handwriting. So it is going to have to be a skill that is learned. And BYU, if you look up BYU script, it'll come right up. This is a free script tutorial for the languages that are listed. Now, there may not be all the Western European languages, but the scripts that are used in these lessons are sort of universal. And as you learn these, you'll be able to read the script from most of the other European countries. So the issue here with Family Search, and I mean with history, looking at your family and getting to know Family Search and some of the other programs and getting involved in learning about your family, is only going to happen when you finally decide to do it. it is a subject that many people seem to be kind of vaccinated against. They don't want to have anything to do with it. It doesn't seem to have interest to others. But I can assure you that those of us who have become involved in it find that it is fascinating and challenging. One of the things I've always said over the years is if it wasn't really difficult, I wouldn't want to do it because I would have gotten either bored or I'd gotten it all done so quickly it wouldn't have mattered. But I always find a challenge. Today I found a number of challenges and had to make up my mind which area I was going to focus on next. So take the first step, and whatever that is for you. If it's watching a video, that's a good first step. If it's logging in on Family Search and getting to know the website and going to the Learning Center, then that's a very, very good first step. It's always helpful to get the instructions before you start, or at least have them as you go along. And so I would suggest that you just take that first step and get going and start getting involved. And I guess this is kind of scary for some people, but you may very well find out who you really are. And that might turn out to be something quite a bit different than what you think. There's was an interesting article just recently about a very prominent person who was a prominent singer, entertainer person, and genealogical research into his particular ancestry has determined that his ancestors were quite a bit different than anyone would have suspected. So it can be quite an interesting surprise to some people to find out who their ancestors are and who you really are. So the key here is to keep learning and keep searching. But the first thing you do is to learn first. Learn before you start searching, because searching can become very, very frustrating and very difficult and seem impenetrable until you begin to learn some of the basic techniques and basic things that you need to know about records and about handwriting and about all of the other parts that go into doing genealogical historical research. Okay, well, thanks for watching.